The morning of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I woke up to a text message that would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the woman I'd planned to spend forever with. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Amanda Brooks, my fiancée of 2 years, had sent me a single line at 6:47 a.m. while I was getting ready for our wedding ceremony scheduled for 3 p.m. that same afternoon. Ryan, I can't do this. Tyler and I are leaving for Las Vegas. I'm sorry. No phone call, no face-to-face conversation, no explanation beyond those 17 words that felt like a knife through my chest. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming, not even me. By 8 p.m. that same evening, I was standing at the altar again. This time looking into the eyes of Claire Thompson, Amanda's maid of honor and best friend since college. The woman who'd spent the entire day picking up the pieces of my broken heart had somehow managed to put it back together in a way I never expected. This is the story of how the worst day of my life became the beginning of something beautiful, and how sometimes the person you're meant to be with has been standing right beside you all along. 6 years earlier, I was a 24-year-old software developer working 80-hour weeks at a small tech startup in downtown Denver, surviving on energy drinks and the dream that our company might actually make it big someday. I'd graduated from the University of Colorado Boulder with a computer science degree and a mountain of student debt that felt heavier than the actual Rocky Mountains visible from my cramped studio apartment. My social life was practically non-existent, consisting mainly of weekend coding sessions and the occasional beer with my coworker Kevin Park, who was just as obsessed with building the next breakthrough application as I was. The startup, Innovate Tech Solutions, occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in the River North Art District. Our office was a chaotic mix of standing desks, multiple monitors, empty pizza boxes, and the constant hum of servers running in what used to be a supply closet. We were developing a customer relationship management platform that we believed would revolutionize how small businesses handled their client interactions. Looking back, I realize I was more in love with the idea of success than I was prepared for the reality of what it would cost me. My parents, Robert and Linda Carter, had always been supportive of my career ambitions, though they worried about my work-life balance. Dad worked as a mechanic at a local auto shop, and Mom managed the front desk at a dental office. They'd sacrificed a lot to help me through college, taking out a second mortgage on their modest home in Arvada to cover expenses that my partial scholarship couldn't handle. The weight of their investment in my future drove me to work even harder, often staying at the office until midnight and returning before sunrise. It was during one of those late-night coding marathons that Kevin convinced me to take a break and join him at a networking event hosted by the Denver Young Professionals Association. The event was held at a trendy rooftop bar in Lodo, the kind of place I never would have gone to on my own because a single cocktail cost more than my typical daily food budget. Kevin insisted that building connections was just as important as building code, and reluctantly, I agreed to join him for what I assumed would be an hour of awkward small talk before retreating back to my comfort zone of keyboards and algorithms. The rooftop was packed with 20 and 30-somethings in business casual attire, all networking with the aggressive enthusiasm that characterized Denver's growing tech scene. I nursed a beer in the corner, watching Kevin work the room like he was born for it, when I noticed her. Amanda Brooks stood near the railing overlooking the city, her blonde hair catching the light from the string bulbs overhead, wearing a black dress that somehow managed to be both professional and elegant. She was talking to a small group of people, gesturing expressively as she spoke, and when she laughed, it was the kind of genuine, uninhibited sound that made everyone around her smile. What struck me most wasn't just her obvious beauty, but the way she commanded attention without seeming to try. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized advertising agency, and it was clear that she understood people in a way that I, as a programmer who spent most of my time talking to computers, found both fascinating and intimidating. When Kevin introduced us later that evening, I was surprised by how easy she was to talk to. How she seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my work, even though I was certain I was boring her with technical details about database optimization and user interface design. Amanda had grown up in Cherry Hills Village, one of Denver's most affluent suburbs, the daughter of Mark Brooks, who owned a successful commercial real estate development company, and Susan Brooks, who sat on the boards of several local charities and cultural organizations. Her upbringing had been everything mine wasn't, filled with private schools, family vacations to Europe, and the kind of financial security that allowed her to pursue internships at prestigious companies without worrying about paying rent. Yet she never made me feel inferior because of our different backgrounds, at least not in those early days. Our first official date was at a small Italian restaurant in the Highlands neighborhood, a place I'd chosen because it had good reviews and prices that wouldn't completely destroy my budget. Amanda arrived wearing jeans and a simple sweater, having somehow intuited that I would be more comfortable in a casual setting. We talked for hours about everything from our college experiences, to our career ambitions, to our favorite movies and books. She told me about her dream of eventually starting her own marketing consultancy, and I shared my hopes of building software that could genuinely help people solve real problems. What I remember most about that night was how she listened. Really listened, not just waiting for her turn to speak, but asking follow-up questions that showed she was processing and considering what I was saying. When I mentioned my parents' sacrifices to help me through college, she didn't respond with empty sympathy or try to change the subject. Instead, she asked about their dreams and whether they felt fulfilled by their work. Questions that showed a depth of emotional intelligence I hadn't expected from someone who'd grown up with such privilege. The relationship developed slowly, partly because of my work schedule, and partly because I was terrified of screwing up something that felt too good to be real. Amanda was patient with my long hours and frequent cancellations when coding emergencies arose. She'd sometimes show up at the office with dinner for Kevin and me. Not because I asked her to, but because she understood that eating was something I often forgot to prioritize when deep in a programming flow state. 6 months into our relationship, Amanda met my parents at a barbecue at their house in Arvada. I'd been nervous about the introduction, knowing that the worlds we came from were vastly different, but Amanda charmed them immediately. She complimented Mom's garden, asked Dad detailed questions about classic car restoration, and insisted on helping with dishes despite Mom's protests. When we left that evening, Dad pulled me aside and said, "She's good people, Ryan. Don't let this one get away." Meanwhile, I was slowly being introduced to Amanda's social circle, a group of young professionals who met regularly for happy hours, weekend trips to Aspen, and dinner parties at each other's apartments. It was through this group that I met Claire Thompson, Amanda's roommate and best friend since their freshman year at CU Boulder. Claire worked as a graphic designer for a nonprofit organization that provided educational resources to underserved communities, and from our first conversation, I could tell she was cut from different cloth than most of Amanda's other friends. Where Amanda was outgoing and confident, Claire was thoughtful and observant. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. She had a way of asking questions that got to the heart of what someone was really thinking or feeling, and she possessed a dry sense of humor that could diffuse tension in group settings when conversations got too competitive or superficial. Claire had grown up in a middle-class family in Fort Collins, the daughter of 2 high school teachers, and like me, she was navigating the social dynamics of Amanda's more affluent friend group as an outsider. What I appreciated most about Claire was her authenticity. She never seemed to be performing or trying to impress anyone, just genuinely engaging with whatever situation she found herself in. When the group went to expensive restaurants, she'd order confidently from the menu without worrying about prices, but she was equally comfortable grabbing pizza and playing board games at someone's apartment. She had a way of making everyone feel included in conversations, especially when someone was being inadvertently left out or talked over. Claire was also the friend who remembered details. She'd ask about my parents' health, follow up on work projects I'd mentioned weeks earlier, and notice when I seemed stressed or tired. During group gatherings, she often ended up in conversations with me about books, movies, or current events, while Amanda networked with other people in the room. These conversations were always engaging and sometimes surprisingly deep, touching on everything from social justice issues to philosophical questions about technology's impact on human relationships. As my relationship with Amanda progressed, I began to notice patterns that should have concerned me more than they did at the time. Amanda was incredibly supportive of my career ambitions, but she also had strong opinions about how I should pursue them. She encouraged me to dress better for work events, to be more aggressive about promoting my contributions to the team, and to start thinking strategically about my long-term career trajectory in ways that felt foreign to my more collaborative, heads-down approach to professional development. She also had ideas about how we should spend our time together. Amanda preferred restaurants and events where we might run into other young professionals, places where she could introduce me to people who might be useful for my career or hers. While I appreciated her networking mindset, I sometimes missed the quiet evenings we'd shared early in our relationship, when we'd cook dinner together in my small kitchen and talk about our days without feeling like we were performing for an audience. The shift became more pronounced after I received a significant promotion at Innovate Tech Solutions, along with a salary increase that finally allowed me to move out of my studio apartment and into a one-bedroom loft in a converted warehouse, downtown. Amanda was thrilled about the promotion, more excited than I'd seen her about anything related to my work, and she immediately began suggesting ways we could leverage my new position to expand our social network and professional opportunities. It was around this time that Tyler Jensen re-entered Amanda's life. Tyler had been Amanda's boyfriend during their sophomore and junior years at CU Boulder, a relationship that had ended when he'd accepted a job opportunity in Seattle immediately after graduation. According to Amanda, they'd remained friends, exchanging occasional texts and social media interactions, but nothing more serious than that. Tyler worked in sales for a major tech company, traveling frequently and earning what Amanda described as serious money for someone their age. When Tyler moved back to Denver to take a regional management position with his company, Amanda was genuinely excited to reconnect with him as a friend. She arranged for our friend group to meet him at a cocktail bar in the Highlands, and I have to admit that Tyler made a strong first impression. He was confident without being arrogant, funny without trying too hard, and he had the kind of natural charisma that made people want to include him in their plans. He also had an easy familiarity with Amanda that spoke to their shared history, inside jokes and references that predated my relationship with her. Tyler quickly became a regular part of our social circle, joining us for weekend activities and group dinners. He was generous with picking up checks, confident in social situations, and he had a way of making everyone feel like they were part of something exciting and important. Amanda clearly enjoyed having him around, and I tried to be supportive of their friendship, even though something about their dynamic made me vaguely uncomfortable in ways I couldn't quite articulate. The discomfort wasn't based on anything specific Tyler said or did. He was always friendly and respectful toward me, never crossing obvious boundaries or making inappropriate comments. But there was something in the way Amanda lit up when he entered a room, the way she laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, the way she seemed to unconsciously mirror his body language during group conversations. It was subtle enough that I questioned whether I was being paranoid or insecure, but persistent enough that I found myself paying attention to their interactions in ways that felt unhealthy. Claire noticed it too, though she was more diplomatic in how she expressed her observations. During a group dinner at an upscale steakhouse in Cherry Creek, while Amanda and Tyler were engrossed in a conversation about some mutual acquaintance from college, Claire leaned over and quietly asked if I was okay. When I asked what she meant, she just gave me a look that conveyed understanding without judgment, the kind of nonverbal communication that close friends develop over time. Work provided a welcome distraction from these social dynamics. Innovate Tech Solutions was growing rapidly, and my role as a senior developer meant longer hours, but also more interesting challenges and greater autonomy over technical decisions. The customer relationship management platform we'd been building was finally gaining traction with clients, and there was talk of seeking venture capital funding to accelerate our expansion. Kevin and I were working on a major system upgrade that would allow us to handle significantly more users, a technical challenge that required all of my focus and creativity. The intensity of the work meant that I was often too tired to analyze the subtle shifts in my relationship with Amanda or to worry about Tyler's increasing presence in our lives. Amanda was understanding about my schedule, though she did express frustration when I had to cancel dinner plans or leave social events early because of work emergencies. She encouraged me to set better boundaries with my employer, to delegate more responsibilities to junior developers, and to prioritize our relationship over what she saw as an excessive commitment to my career. These conversations about work-life balance were usually constructive, but they also highlighted fundamental differences in how Amanda and I approached professional obligations. Her marketing role, while demanding, had more predictable hours and fewer genuine emergencies that required immediate attention. She could leave work at work in ways that weren't always possible for me, especially during critical development phases when system failures could affect thousands of users and cost the company significant revenue. The tension came to a head during a weekend trip to Breckenridge that Amanda had planned for our friend group. I'd committed to joining them for the weekend, but on Friday afternoon, we discovered a major security vulnerability in our platform that required immediate attention. The fix would take most of the weekend, and there was no way to postpone it without putting our clients' data at risk. When I called Amanda to explain that I couldn't make the trip, she was more upset than I'd ever seen her. "Ryan, you promised," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "I've been planning this for weeks, and everyone is expecting you to be there. Can't someone else handle it?" I tried to explain the technical details of why I specifically needed to work on the fix, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. To her, this felt like another example of me prioritizing work over our relationship. And from her perspective, I could understand why it seemed that way. But from my perspective, this wasn't a choice between work and fun. It was a choice between protecting our users and potentially destroying everything we'd built at the company. The weekend trip proceeded without me, and based on the photos Amanda posted on social media, everyone had a great time skiing, dining out, and relaxing at the mountain resort. Tyler had joined the group, and many of the photos featured him and Amanda together, laughing on the ski slopes or sharing drinks by the fireplace. When Amanda returned on Sunday evening, she was still upset about my absence, but she also seemed energized in a way that made me wonder what I'd missed beyond just a fun weekend with friends. It was Claire who filled me in on some of the details. She stopped by my apartment on Monday evening, ostensibly to drop off some leftover food from the trip, but really to check in on how I was doing. According to Claire, the weekend had been fun but also somewhat awkward, with Tyler and Amanda spending most of their time together while the rest of the group felt like they were intruding on something private. "I don't think anything inappropriate happened," Claire said carefully, "but there's definitely still something between them." Amanda kept talking about how Tyler understands her ambitions in ways that other people don't, and Tyler was pretty openly flirting with her, though he was subtle about it when other people were paying attention. I appreciated Claire's honesty, even though it confirmed my worst fears about the weekend. She also mentioned that several people in the group had asked where I was and seemed disappointed that I hadn't joined them, which made me feel better about missing the trip for work reasons. Claire had apparently spent much of the weekend hiking, alone or reading by the fireplace, content to enjoy the mountain scenery without getting caught up in the social drama that seemed to follow Tyler wherever he went. The conversation with Claire was the first time either of us had explicitly acknowledged that something was shifting in the group dynamic, and it felt good to talk honestly about what we were both observing. Claire had a way of discussing sensitive topics without making me feel like I was being disloyal to Amanda or paranoid about Tyler's intentions. She validated my concerns while also encouraging me to have a direct conversation with Amanda about what I was feeling and what I needed from our relationship. That conversation with Amanda never happened, at least not in the way Claire had suggested. Every time I tried to bring up my concerns about Tyler or my feelings about their friendship, Amanda would deflect or turn the conversation back to my work schedule and what she saw as my lack of commitment to our relationship. She accused me of being jealous and insecure, character flaws that she suggested I needed to work on if our relationship was going to succeed long-term. The dynamic continued for several months, with Tyler becoming an increasingly central figure in Amanda's life and our social circle. He was always around for group activities, often suggesting expensive restaurants or events that pushed the boundaries of what I could comfortably afford even with my recent promotion. Amanda would sometimes make comments about how nice it was to be around someone who could appreciate the finer things, or who understood how to live well. Comments that felt pointed even though they were never directed explicitly at me. Despite these growing tensions, there were still good moments in my relationship with Amanda. She could be incredibly thoughtful and supportive when she focused her attention on me, remembering important deadlines at work, or planning surprise dinners to celebrate my accomplishments. She talked frequently about our future together, discussing everything from career goals to travel plans to what kind of house we might want to buy together someday. These conversations made me feel like we were building towards something meaningful, even when day-to-day interactions felt strained. It was during one of these future-focused conversations that Amanda first brought up the idea of getting engaged. We'd been together for almost 4 years at that point, and marriage felt like the natural next step in our relationship. Amanda had strong opinions about what kind of engagement ring she wanted, which venues we should consider for the wedding, and how long the engagement period should be to allow for proper planning. Her enthusiasm about these details was infectious, and I found myself getting excited about the prospect of formally committing to building a life together. The engagement planning process revealed both the best and worst aspects of our relationship. Amanda's organizational skills and attention to detail meant that every aspect of the wedding would be carefully planned and beautifully executed. She had vision and taste that I knew would result in an event that our friends and family would remember fondly for years to come. But the planning process also highlighted our different priorities and communication styles in ways that sometimes felt overwhelming. Amanda wanted a large wedding with all the traditional elements, a celebration that would reflect both families' social status and our own success as a couple. She envisioned a guest list of over 200 people, a venue that would require booking a year in advance, and details like custom invitations, elaborate floral arrangements, and a live band for the reception. The total cost would be substantial, requiring contributions from both sets of parents as well as significant savings from our own income. My parents were supportive, but also concerned about the financial implications of such an elaborate celebration. Dad pulled me aside during one family dinner and asked if I was sure this was what I wanted. Not just the marriage, but the specific kind of wedding Amanda was planning. He didn't criticize Amanda's vision, but he did suggest that starting a marriage with substantial debt might create unnecessary stress during what should be an exciting time in our lives. Claire was involved in the wedding planning as Amanda's maid of honor, and she often served as an unofficial mediator when Amanda and I disagreed about details. Claire had a gift for finding compromises that satisfied Amanda's desire for elegance, while respecting my concerns about budget and practicality. She suggested vendors who offered high-quality services at reasonable prices, helped Amanda prioritize which elements were most important to her, and generally made the planning process more manageable than it would have been otherwise. Working with Claire on wedding planning also gave us more opportunities to spend time together, and I began to appreciate aspects of her personality that I hadn't fully noticed before. She was incredibly organized and detail-oriented, but she also maintained perspective about what really mattered. When Amanda would get stressed about minor details like napkin colors or centerpiece heights, Claire would gently redirect the conversation toward bigger picture concerns like making sure all the guests felt welcome and that the celebration reflected our values as a couple. Claire also had thoughtful opinions about relationship dynamics that went beyond surface-level wedding planning details. During one particularly long planning session at Amanda's apartment, when Amanda had stepped out to take a phone call from Tyler, Claire asked me how I was feeling about everything, not just the wedding logistics but the overall direction of my relationship. It was the kind of question that invited honesty, and I found myself sharing concerns and uncertainties that I hadn't articulated even to myself. Marriage is supposed to make you feel more secure and confident about your future, Claire said. If you're feeling anxious or uncertain about fundamental aspects of your relationship, those feelings don't disappear just because you're wearing wedding rings. Her words stayed with me long after that conversation, and I began paying more attention to my emotional state during wedding planning activities. While I was excited about marrying Amanda, I was also increasingly anxious about aspects of our relationship that seemed to be getting worse rather than better as we moved toward our wedding date. The issues with Tyler hadn't resolved. If anything, his presence in our lives had become more pronounced as Amanda included him in more wedding-related activities and conversations. The breaking point came 6 weeks before our scheduled wedding date, during what was supposed to be a final tasting at our chosen venue, Mountain View Resort in the foothills outside Denver. Amanda had invited Tyler to join us for the tasting, explaining that she valued his opinion about food and wanted his input on the menu selections. I felt uncomfortable about including him in such an intimate wedding planning activity, but Amanda dismissed my concerns as unnecessary jealousy and insisted that Tyler's presence would be helpful. During the tasting, Tyler and Amanda sat next to each other, sharing plates and commenting on each course with an intimacy that felt inappropriate for the occasion. They had inside jokes about foods they'd tried together during college, and they seemed to be enjoying their own private conversation more than they were engaging with the venue coordinator or with me. When the coordinator asked about our vision for the reception, Amanda deferred to Tyler's suggestions about music and timeline, as if his opinions mattered more than mine did. The drive home from the venue was tense and mostly silent. When we reached Amanda's apartment, I finally asked the question that had been building in my mind for months. Amanda, are you having second thoughts about marrying me? She looked genuinely surprised by the question, which somehow made me feel worse rather than better. Of course not, Ryan. Why would you even ask that? I tried to explain my concerns about Tyler's role in our relationship and in our wedding planning, but Amanda became defensive immediately. She accused me of being controlling and insecure, of trying to limit her friendships because of my own emotional limitations. According to her, the problem wasn't Tyler's presence in our lives. It was my inability to trust her and my tendency to interpret innocent interactions as threats to our relationship. The conversation escalated into our worst fight ever, with both of us saying things that crossed lines we'd never crossed before. Amanda accused me of being boring and predictable, of lacking the ambition and confidence that she needed in a life partner. I accused her of being selfish and inconsiderate, of prioritizing her friendship with Tyler over her commitment to our relationship. We both said things we couldn't take back, and when I left her apartment that night, I wasn't sure whether we would still be getting married in 6 weeks. The next few days were awkward and strained, with both of us avoiding the serious conversation we needed to have about the state of our relationship. Amanda sent conciliatory text messages apologizing for the things she'd said during our fight, and I responded with similar apologies for my own harsh words. But neither of us addressed the underlying issues that had caused the fight in the first place, and I could feel the tension building toward our wedding date like a storm approaching. Over the mountains. It was Claire who suggested that Amanda and I needed professional help working through our communication issues before getting married. She recommended a couples counselor who specialized in premarital counseling, someone who could help us develop better tools for handling conflict and clarifying our expectations for marriage. Amanda was resistant to the idea at first, viewing therapy as an admission that our relationship was fundamentally flawed, but she eventually agreed to attend a few sessions. The counseling sessions were both helpful and revealing in ways I hadn't expected. The therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had a gift for identifying patterns in our communication that neither Amanda nor I had recognized on our own. She pointed out that we often talked past each other rather than truly listening, that we made assumptions about each other's motivations without checking whether those assumptions were accurate, and that we had different conflict resolution styles that weren't necessarily compatible without conscious effort. Dr. Walsh also helped us identify areas where our values and long-term goals were aligned versus areas where we had fundamental disagreements that would require ongoing negotiation. Amanda and I both wanted successful careers, financial security, and a relationship based on mutual respect and support. But we had different ideas about how to balance individual ambition with couple priorities, and we had different comfort levels with social obligations and networking activities that might advance our careers. The counseling sessions gave me hope that Amanda and I could work through our differences and build a stronger foundation for marriage. But they also revealed the extent to which Tyler's presence in our lives was affecting our relationship dynamics. When Dr. Walsh asked Amanda to describe her ideal social life as a married couple, many of her responses involved activities and relationships that included Tyler as a central figure. When she asked me to describe my concerns about our relationship, many of my responses focused on feeling like a third wheel in my own engagement. Dr. Walsh suggested that Amanda and I needed to have explicit conversations about boundaries in our marriage, particularly regarding friendships with people we dated in the past. She recommended that we establish clear guidelines about spending time alone with ex-partners, about including them in couple activities, and about sharing intimate details of our relationship with friends who might have conflicted loyalties. These conversations were difficult, but seemed productive at the time. Amanda agreed that she could understand why her close friendship with Tyler might make me uncomfortable, and she committed to setting clearer boundaries that would protect our relationship while still allowing her to maintain the friendship. I agreed to work on my own insecurities and to trust Amanda's judgment about her relationships with other people, as long as she remained transparent about her interactions with Tyler. For a few weeks, things seemed better between us. Amanda made an effort to include me more actively in group activities, and she stopped seeking Tyler's input on wedding planning decisions. Tyler seemed to sense the shift and became less prominent in our social circle, though he still attended group events and remained friendly with both of us. I felt more confident about our approaching wedding date and began to believe that we'd successfully navigated our most serious relationship challenge. The illusion of progress lasted until the morning of our wedding day, when Amanda's text message shattered everything I thought I knew about our relationship and our future together. As I sat in my downtown loft, still wearing the pajamas I'd slept in, staring at those 17 words on my phone screen, I realized that all the counseling, sessions and boundary conversations had been meaningless. Amanda had already made her choice, and it wasn't me. The text message felt like a physical blow, the kind that knocks the wind out of you and leaves you gasping for air that won't come. I read Amanda's words 3 times before my brain could process what they actually meant. Ryan, I can't do this. Tyler and I are leaving for Las Vegas. I'm sorry. 17 words that demolished 6 years of my life, 2 years of engagement planning, and every assumption I'd made about the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. My first instinct was to call her, to demand an explanation that made sense of this sudden reversal. The phone rang once before going straight to voicemail, and I realized she'd probably turned it off or blocked my number. The sound of her cheerful, outgoing message, recorded months ago when we were still planning our future together, felt like mockery now. I hung up without leaving a message, my hands shaking as I tried to process what this meant for the day ahead. The wedding was scheduled to begin in 8 hours. Our families were probably already awake, getting ready for what they expected to be a celebration. The venue staff would be setting up chairs and decorating the ceremony space. The photographer would arrive soon to capture getting-ready photos. The catering team would begin food preparation. 200 guests had cleared their schedules and made travel arrangements to witness Amanda and me promise to love each other forever. And now none of it was going to happen because my fiancé had run away with another man. I sat on the edge of my bed, still holding my phone, waiting for the emotional devastation to hit me full force. I expected to feel heartbroken, betrayed, angry, lost. Instead, what I felt was a strange sense of clarity, as if someone had finally turned on bright lights in a room where I'd been stumbling around in dim shadows for months. The relief that washed over me was so unexpected and overwhelming that I almost started laughing, which seemed like an inappropriate response to having my life destroyed via text message. For the first time in months, I didn't have to wonder whether Amanda really wanted to marry me. I didn't have to analyze her interactions with Tyler or question whether I was being paranoid about their friendship. I didn't have to pretend that our relationship problems would magically resolve themselves once we were married. The uncertainty that had been eating at me for so long was finally gone, replaced by the cold reality of Amanda's choice. My phone started buzzing with incoming calls and text messages. Kevin was trying to reach me, probably to coordinate our morning schedule. My parents were calling, likely wanting to confirm pickup times and last-minute details. Amanda's parents were texting, presumably unaware that their daughter had just destroyed everyone's weekend plans. I ignored all of them, needing time to think before I had to start explaining this disaster to other people. The practical implications began sinking in as my initial shock wore off. Someone would need to contact all the vendors and guests. The venue would need to be notified immediately. The catering deposit was probably non-refundable. The photographer and band would still expect payment even though there wouldn't be a wedding to document or entertain. My parents had spent thousands of dollars on this celebration, money they couldn't afford to lose. Amanda's parents had covered even more of the expenses, and now all of that investment was gone. But beyond the financial losses, there was the human cost of Amanda's decision. Our families had been looking forward to this day for months. My grandmother had traveled from Florida, her first airplane trip in over a decade. Amanda's college friends had organized their schedules around being in Denver for the wedding. Kevin had prepared a best man speech that he'd been working on for weeks. Claire had spent countless hours helping with wedding preparations, from dress shopping to venue coordination to managing the endless details that go into planning a celebration for 200 people. Claire. The realization hit me like another physical blow. Claire would be devastated by Amanda's betrayal, not just because of the friendship angle, but because she'd invested so much time and emotional energy into making this wedding perfect. She'd been planning to fly back to Denver from a work conference in Portland the night before the wedding, and she was probably already at the airport or on a plane, completely unaware that her best friend had just abandoned everything they'd planned together. I finally forced myself to get up and start making the necessary phone calls. My parents were first, and the conversation was as difficult as I'd expected. Mom cried, Dad swore, and both of them struggled to understand how Amanda could do something so cruel and sudden. They offered to come over immediately, but I asked them to wait until I'd had time to contact the vendors and figure out what could be canceled versus what we'd have to pay for regardless. The venue coordinator at Mountain View Resort was professional, but clearly frustrated when I called to explain the situation. Canceling with less than 8 hours' notice meant forfeiting all deposits and paying substantial penalties for vendor coordination that had already begun. The catering team had started food preparation at dawn, and there was no way to recover those costs. The floral arrangements had been delivered and installed overnight. The band members were already traveling to the venue. Each phone call felt like a small death, another piece of the life I'd been planning that evaporated into financial loss and social embarrassment. The photographer was understanding but firm about contract terms. The transportation company that was supposed to handle guest shuttles between the hotel and venue required full payment regardless of cancellation. Even vendors who sympathized with my situation couldn't absorb the costs of last-minute changes without passing them along to me. Kevin arrived at my apartment while I was still working through the vendor list. He'd been trying to call for over an hour, and when I hadn't answered, he'd driven over to check on me. The look on his face when I explained what had happened was a mixture of shock, anger, and protective concern that almost broke through my emotional numbness. Kevin had never particularly liked Amanda, though he'd been diplomatic about his reservations, and I could see him struggling not to say, "I told you so," in the middle of my crisis. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, which was exactly the right question. Kevin understood that sympathy and analysis could come later. Right now, I needed practical help managing the disaster Amanda had created. We divided the remaining vendor calls between us, with Kevin handling the music and transportation, while I dealt with the venue and catering. He also took on the responsibility of calling my extended family members who were staying at hotels around Denver, people who needed to know immediately that their travel had been wasted. I focused on the vendors who required immediate decisions about payment and cancellation terms. The process of dismantling a wedding that was supposed to happen in a few hours was surreal and exhausting. Every phone call reminded me of how many people had been counting on this day, how many plans had been made around Amanda's and my commitment to each other. The wedding had become bigger than just our relationship. It was an event that dozens of people had organized their lives around, and now all of that coordination was meaningless. By noon, we'd made most of the necessary calls and established that the financial damage would be substantial, but not catastrophic. My parents would lose their deposit contributions, but they wouldn't be bankrupted by the cancellation fees. Amanda's parents would bear the largest financial cost, which seemed appropriate given that their daughter had created this disaster. Some vendors were willing to work with us on payment schedules, understanding that unexpected wedding cancellations weren't exactly planned expenses. The guest notification process was more complicated. Kevin suggested sending a group email or text message explaining that the wedding had been canceled due to unforeseen circumstances, but that felt inadequate for people who had made significant commitments to attend. Many guests were already traveling or had arrived in Denver the night before. They deserved personal communication, not a mass notification that treated them like an inconvenience. I started with immediate family members and close friends, making individual calls to explain what had happened. Most people responded with shock and sympathy, though I could hear the underlying curiosity about why Amanda had made such a sudden decision. Some asked if there was a chance we might reconcile and reschedule, questions that forced me to articulate my own feelings about the situation more clearly than I'd been able to do even for myself. Talking to my grandmother was particularly difficult. She'd been so excited about the wedding, not just because she loved me, but because she'd been looking forward to meeting Amanda's family and celebrating what she saw as an important milestone in my life. When I explained that Amanda had left with another man, Grandma was quiet for a long moment before saying, "Well, sweetheart, better to find out now than after you're married. Sometimes people show you who they really are when you least expect it." Her perspective helped me maintain some emotional equilibrium during a day that could have easily spiraled into despair. Amanda had shown me who she really was, not just through her decision to leave, but through the way she'd chosen to communicate that decision. A text message on the morning of our wedding wasn't just cruel, it was cowardly. It avoided any possibility of conversation, negotiation, or mutual decision-making about our future. Claire's flight was scheduled to land at Denver International Airport at 2:30, just 30 minutes before our wedding ceremony was supposed to begin. I'd been dreading the conversation with her more than any of the others, because I knew how invested she'd been in making this day perfect. Claire had taken vacation time to fly back early from her work conference, had coordinated with vendors all week to ensure every detail was handled properly, and had probably spent her morning getting ready to fulfill her maid of honor responsibilities. Kevin offered to pick Claire up from the airport and break the news to her, but I knew I needed to handle that conversation myself. Claire deserved to hear what had happened directly from me, not secondhand from someone else. I drove to the airport still wearing the jeans and t-shirt I'd thrown on that morning, feeling underdressed and unprepared for one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I waited at the baggage claim area, watching passengers from Claire's flight emerge from the security area. When I saw her walking toward me in a traveling outfit with a garment bag draped over her arm, presumably containing her maid of honor dress, the reality of the situation hit me again. Claire had spent months helping plan this wedding, had probably gotten up early that morning in Portland to catch her flight, and had no idea that everything she'd worked toward had been destroyed by a text message. The expression on Claire's face when she saw me waiting in jeans instead of my wedding attire told me she knew something was seriously wrong, even before I said anything. She dropped her luggage and hurried over, her eyes searching my face for clues about what kind of disaster required the groom to pick up the maid of honor at the airport 2 hours before the ceremony. "Ryan, what's wrong? Are you okay? Is someone hurt?" I struggled to find words that would explain the situation without sounding completely insane. "Claire, Amanda left. She sent me a text message this morning saying she can't go through with the wedding. She's gone to Las Vegas with Tyler." Claire stared at me for several seconds, processing information that probably seemed impossible to believe. Amanda was her best friend, someone she'd known for over 6 years, and the idea that Amanda would abandon her wedding and her friendship via text message must have been as shocking to Claire as it had been to me. "Are you serious?" she asked, though she could obviously see from my expression that I wasn't joking. "She just left? Without talking to you? Without explaining anything?" I showed her Amanda's text message, and Claire read it several times with the same disbelief I'd experienced that morning. She knew Amanda well enough to recognize how completely out of character this behavior seemed, but she also knew Amanda well enough to understand the undercurrents that had been building in our relationship for months. "Oh my God, Ryan. I'm so sorry. I can't believe she would do this to you, to everyone who's been planning for today." Claire's immediate concern was for my emotional state rather than for her own disappointment or confusion, which was typical of her generous approach to relationships. We retrieved her luggage and walked to my car, both of us trying to process the implications of Amanda's decision. Claire had questions about the timeline, about whether I'd had any warning signs that morning, about what this meant for all the guests and vendors who were expecting a wedding to happen in less than 2 hours. I filled her in on the phone calls I'd been making all morning and the financial and logistical disaster that Amanda had created with her sudden departure. During the drive back to downtown Denver, Claire became increasingly angry on my behalf. She'd seen Amanda's behavior with Tyler over the past few months, had noticed the same dynamics that had made me uncomfortable, but she'd trusted Amanda to handle her conflicted feelings appropriately. The idea that Amanda had been planning to leave with Tyler while continuing to plan our wedding felt like a betrayal, not just of me, but of everyone who'd been supporting our relationship. "She could have talked to you," Claire said, her voice tight with frustration. "She could have called off the engagement weeks ago if she was having second thoughts. She could have been honest about her feelings for Tyler instead of putting you through months of uncertainty. Running away on your wedding day is it's cowardly and cruel." Hearing Claire articulate what I'd been feeling helped validate my own emotional response to the situation. I'd been questioning whether I was overreacting to Amanda's decision, whether I should be more understanding of her confusion and conflicted feelings. But Claire's perspective confirmed that Amanda's behavior was objectively wrong, regardless of whatever personal struggles she might have been experiencing. When we reached my apartment building, Claire asked what I needed from her. She was supposed to be getting ready for a wedding that was no longer happening, but she seemed genuinely committed to helping me navigate whatever came next. I admitted that I didn't really know what came next, that I'd spent the morning dealing with practical details, but hadn't thought much beyond getting through the immediate crisis. Claire suggested that we needed to contact Amanda's parents, who were probably still preparing for the wedding and had no idea their daughter had fled the state. She also pointed out that many wedding guests were likely already on their way to the venue, and someone needed to be there to explain what had happened, and prevent people from waiting around for a ceremony that wasn't going to occur. The conversation with Amanda's parents was even more difficult than I'd anticipated. Mark Brooks answered the phone sounding excited and slightly rushed, probably dealing with last-minute preparations on his end. when I explained that Amanda had left with Tyler and the wedding was canceled. There was a long silence before he asked me to repeat what I'd said. She did what? Mark's voice shifted from confusion to anger as he processed the information. Ryan, are you telling me that my daughter abandoned her wedding to run off with some other man? And she told you this in a text message? I confirmed the details, and Mark handed the phone to Susan, who reacted with a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment. Both of Amanda's parents were mortified by their daughter's behavior, not just because of what it meant for our relationship, but because of how it reflected on their family. They'd invested significant money in the wedding, but more importantly, they'd been proud of Amanda's relationship with me, and had looked forward to welcoming me as their son-in-law. Susan Brooks apologized repeatedly for Amanda's actions, as if she was somehow responsible for her adult daughter's decisions. She offered to try reaching Amanda directly, to see if there was any possibility of changing her mind, or at least getting a better explanation of what had prompted such a drastic decision. I told her she was welcome to try, but that I wasn't interested in salvaging a relationship with someone who could treat me so carelessly. Mark Brooks was more direct in his response. Ryan, I want you to know that this doesn't reflect how Susan and I feel about you. You've been a good partner to Amanda, and she's making a terrible mistake. I don't understand what's gotten into her, but you deserve better than this. Their support meant more to me than I'd expected, and it highlighted another dimension of Amanda's betrayal. She hadn't just destroyed our relationship. She'd damaged relationships between families that had grown close over the past 6 years. My parents had become genuinely fond of Amanda's parents, and Amanda's decision would affect those friendships as well. Claire and I drove to Mountain View Resort to handle the guest situation in person. The venue was beautiful, decorated exactly as Amanda and I had planned, with white flowers and mountain views that should have provided the backdrop for our happily ever after. Instead, it became the setting for one of the most awkward conversations of my life, as we explained to arriving guests that the bride had fled with another man and there would be no wedding ceremony. Most guests were understanding and supportive, expressing sympathy for my situation and anger at Amanda's behavior. Some of Amanda's friends seemed genuinely shocked, as if they couldn't reconcile the Amanda they knew with someone who would abandon a wedding via text message. A few people asked probing questions about whether there had been warning signs or relationship problems. Questions that I answered as diplomatically as possible while making it clear that Amanda's decision had been sudden and unilateral. My extended family members rallied around me with the kind of protective support that reminded me why family relationships matter, even when romantic relationships fail. My uncle offered to drive to Las Vegas and talk some sense into Amanda, an offer I declined but appreciated. My cousins suggested organizing an impromptu celebration to salvage something positive from the day, an idea that seemed premature, but touched me nonetheless. Claire handled much of the guest communication with grace and efficiency, explaining the situation to people as they arrived, and helping coordinate transportation back to hotels for those who needed it. She seemed to understand instinctively how to balance honesty about what had happened with discretion about the personal details of my relationship with Amanda. Watching her manage a crisis that she hadn't created, supporting me through a disaster that had destroyed her plans for the day as much as mine, I felt grateful to have someone so fundamentally decent in my life. By evening, the immediate crisis had been managed. Guests had been notified, vendors had been contacted, and the financial implications had been assessed. Claire and I were sitting in my apartment, exhausted from a day that had started with devastating news and evolved into a complex disaster management operation. We'd ordered pizza and were drinking beer from my refrigerator, trying to decompress from the emotional and logistical intensity of the day. "How are you holding up?" Claire asked, which was the first time anyone had asked about my emotional state rather than focusing on practical details. I thought about her question seriously before answering. "Honestly, I feel relieved more than anything else. Is that terrible?" Claire shook her head. "It's not terrible at all. You've been walking on eggshells for months, trying to navigate Amanda's relationship with Tyler and wondering whether you were being paranoid or insecure. Now you know you weren't imagining things, and you don't have to pretend anymore that everything was fine." Her validation meant everything to me in that moment. Claire had observed the same dynamics that had been making me uncomfortable, but she'd also seen how those dynamics had affected my confidence and self-trust. Amanda's behavior over the past few months had made me question my own perceptions, and instincts, and Claire's perspective helped me understand that my concerns had been legitimate. We talked for hours about the relationship patterns I'd been too close to see clearly. Claire pointed out how Amanda had consistently prioritized Tyler's opinions and feelings over mine, how she'd dismissed my concerns as jealousy rather than addressing the underlying issues, and how she'd made me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting boundaries in our relationship. From Claire's outside perspective, it was clear that Amanda had been emotionally involved with Tyler for months, while stringing me along through an engagement and wedding planning process. The worst part, Claire said, is that she made you feel like you were the problem. Like you were being possessive or insecure for noticing that she was pulling away from you and toward him. That's not fair. And it's not healthy relationship behavior. As the evening wore on, I found myself paying attention to Claire in ways I hadn't before. She was beautiful, obviously, but more than that. She was present and engaged in a way that felt genuine and supportive. She listened without trying to fix everything, offered perspectives without being judgmental, and somehow managed to help me process the day's events without making the conversation feel heavy or overwhelming. When Claire finally said she should head back to her hotel, I realized I didn't want her to leave. Not because I was afraid of being alone, but because I genuinely enjoyed her company and felt more like myself when she was around than I had in months. The feeling was confusing and inappropriate given that my engagement had only ended that morning, but it was also undeniable. "Claire," I said as she was gathering her things, "thank you for today, for everything. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." She paused in the doorway and looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Ryan, you're going to be okay. Better than okay, actually. Amanda made a choice that says everything about her character and nothing about your worth as a partner. Don't let her decision make you doubt yourself." After she left, I sat in my apartment thinking about the day's events and about Claire's role in helping me navigate the crisis. I'd known her for years as Amanda's best friend and as part of our social circle, but I'd never really considered her as an individual separate from those relationships. Today had shown me aspects of her personality that were remarkable, from her emotional intelligence to her practical competence to her genuine care for other people's well-being. The thought that crossed my mind as I finally went to bed was both shocking and oddly comforting. What if Amanda leaving wasn't the end of something important, but the beginning of something better? What if the person I was supposed to be with had been right there all along, and I'd just been too focused on the wrong relationship to notice? I fell asleep that night feeling more hopeful about my future than I had in months, despite having my wedding day destroyed by a text message. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you opens the door to the best thing that could happen to you, and I was beginning to suspect that Amanda's betrayal might have been exactly the wake-up call I needed. The week following the wedding disaster brought a series of developments that made Amanda's abandonment seem like just the beginning of a much larger betrayal. I'd expected some awkwardness and social fallout from the canceled ceremony. But what I hadn't anticipated was the coordinated campaign that began almost immediately to pressure me into accepting responsibility for Amanda's actions and working toward reconciliation. It started with Amanda's parents, who called me 3 days after the failed wedding with what they described as important information about their daughter's emotional state. According to Susan Brooks, Amanda was having second thoughts about her decision and was struggling with guilt over how she'd handled the situation. Mark Brooks suggested that perhaps there had been a misunderstanding, that Amanda's departure with Tyler might have been an impulsive reaction to pre-wedding stress, rather than a calculated betrayal of our relationship. "Ryan, you know Amanda loves you," Susan said during a phone call that felt more like a negotiation than a conversation. "She's been calling us every day, crying about what she's done. She made a mistake, but people make mistakes when they're under pressure. The wedding planning was so stressful, and Tyler was telling her all sorts of things about how marriage would change her, how she'd lose her independence. She got scared and made a bad decision." The narrative they were presenting felt carefully constructed to minimize Amanda's agency in the situation, while maximizing my responsibility for fixing it. According to her parents, Amanda was a victim of manipulation by Tyler and circumstance rather than someone who had made a deliberate choice to abandon our relationship. They seemed to believe that if I could just understand the pressure Amanda had been under, I would be willing to forgive her behavior and work toward rebuilding our relationship. Mark Brooks was more direct in his approach. "Son, I know Amanda hurt you, but she's the best thing that's ever happened to you. You're not going to find another woman like her, someone from a good family who could help advance your career and give you the kind of life you deserve. Don't let pride destroy your future over one mistake." His words revealed assumptions about my motivations and capabilities that I found both insulting and illuminating. The suggestion that I needed Amanda's family connections to succeed professionally, that I was unlikely to find another partner of comparable quality, that my future happiness depended on overlooking her betrayal in favor of pragmatic considerations about social status and career advancement. These weren't the values I wanted to base a marriage on, and they weren't the values I thought the Brooks family had embraced during our 6 years together. My own parents were surprisingly receptive to the reconciliation pressure, though their motivations seemed different from Amanda's parents. Mom was primarily concerned about my emotional well-being and convinced that I would struggle to find happiness without Amanda. She'd become genuinely fond of Amanda over the years, and she seemed unable to process that the woman she'd welcomed as a daughter-in-law could be capable of such cruel behavior. "Ryan, sweetheart, I know you're hurt right now, but Amanda has been part of our family for 6 years," Mom said during one of our increasingly frequent phone conversations about the situation. "People make mistakes when they're scared. She probably just needed some time to think things through. If she's ready to come home and make things right, maybe you should consider giving her another chance." Dad was more skeptical of Amanda's motivations but equally concerned about my long-term prospects. He'd invested significant emotional and financial resources in my relationship with Amanda, and the idea of writing off that investment seemed wasteful to him. More importantly, he worried that I was making a decision based on wounded pride rather than rational consideration of my future happiness and security. "Son, I'm not saying what Amanda did was right, but you've got to think about the big picture here," Dad said during one of our weekend conversations. "You're 30 years old, you've got a good career, but finding the right person to settle down with isn't getting any easier. Amanda knows you. She knows our family. She fits into your life in ways that took years to develop. Starting over with someone new is a big risk." The pressure from both sets of parents created a narrative in which my reluctance to pursue reconciliation was portrayed as stubborn pride, rather than reasonable self-protection. They seemed to believe that my primary concern should be salvaging the social and financial investments we'd all made in the relationship, rather than considering whether I could trust Amanda enough to build a healthy marriage with her. The social pressure was reinforced by Amanda's attempts to contact me directly. After several days of ignored phone calls, she began sending text messages that alternated between apology and manipulation. Some messages expressed genuine remorse for her behavior and acknowledged the pain she'd caused me and our families. Others suggested that I was being unreasonable by refusing to discuss the situation, that my silence was making reconciliation impossible and hurting everyone involved. "Ryan, I know I screwed up, but we can fix this if you'll just talk to me," read one message that arrived while I was at work. "I made a terrible mistake, but it doesn't have to ruin everything we've built together. I love you, and I know you love me too. Don't let Tyler destroy what we have." The way Amanda framed her messages was particularly manipulative, positioning Tyler as the primary villain in the situation while minimizing her own agency in the decision to leave. According to her version of events, Tyler had manipulated her into believing that marriage would ruin her independence and career prospects. She'd been confused and scared, and she'd made an impulsive decision that she now regretted. If I could just find it in my heart to forgive her, we could get past this obstacle and build an even stronger relationship. Other messages were more direct in their emotional manipulation. "I can't eat, I can't sleep. I can't focus on anything except how much I've hurt you," Amanda wrote in a message that arrived late one evening. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you to at least let me explain what happened. You're the best man I've ever known, and I threw it all away for someone who doesn't even really care about me. Please don't give up on us." The messages created a steady drip of emotional pressure that was difficult to ignore even when I was trying to move forward with my life. Amanda knew exactly which emotional buttons to push, how to appeal to my compassion and my sense of responsibility for her well-being. She understood that I'd always been someone who wanted to fix problems and help people, and she was leveraging those qualities to try to manipulate me into overlooking her betrayal. Kevin became increasingly frustrated with the pressure campaign and encouraged me to block Amanda's number entirely. He'd never trusted Amanda's motivations, and her behavior during the wedding crisis had confirmed his worst suspicions about her character. From his perspective, Amanda's attempts at reconciliation were just another form of manipulation, designed to restore her social status and financial security rather than repair genuine emotional damage. "She's not sorry about what she did to you," Kevin pointed out during one of our regular check-ins. "She's sorry about the consequences she's facing. If Tyler had turned out to be everything she hoped he'd be, you'd never hear from her again. She's only coming back because running away with him didn't work out the way she planned." Kevin's analysis was harsh but probably accurate. Amanda's messages never included specific acknowledgement of how her behavior had affected me emotionally, never addressed the months of gaslighting that had preceded her departure, never took responsibility for the financial and social damage her decision had caused to both families. Instead, they focused on her own emotional distress and on general appeals for forgiveness that didn't demonstrate any real understanding of what she'd done wrong. The pressure intensified when Amanda returned to Denver after a week in Las Vegas. According to mutual friends, her relationship with Tyler had imploded almost immediately once they were removed from the excitement and drama of their escape. Tyler had apparently expected their Las Vegas adventure to be a temporary rebellion, rather than a permanent life change. And when Amanda began talking about finding jobs and establishing a new life together, he'd made it clear that he wasn't interested in that level of commitment. Amanda's return to Denver was accompanied by a more sophisticated reconciliation campaign that involved strategic deployment of mutual friends and social pressure. People who had remained neutral during the immediate aftermath of the wedding crisis began reaching out to me with stories about Amanda's emotional state and suggestions that I consider giving her another chance. "Ryan, I saw Amanda at lunch yesterday, and she looks terrible," reported Jessica Martinez, one of Amanda's co-workers who had become friendly with both of us over the years. "She's lost weight, she can barely concentrate at work, and she keeps talking about what a huge mistake she made. I know she hurt you, but she's really suffering for it. Maybe you two could at least meet for coffee and talk about what happened." These secondhand reports of Amanda's distress were clearly intended to make me feel guilty for maintaining boundaries and refusing to engage with her attempts at reconciliation. The implicit message was that my refusal to consider forgiveness was causing ongoing harm to Amanda, that I had some responsibility for her emotional well-being, even after she'd betrayed our relationship so completely. The manipulation became more direct when Amanda began showing up at places where she knew I'd be. She appeared at the coffee shop near my office during my usual lunch break, at the gym where I worked out in the evenings, at the grocery store I frequented on weekends. These encounters were designed to seem accidental, but the frequency made it clear that Amanda was monitoring my schedule and creating opportunities for spontaneous conversations. During one of these staged encounters, Amanda approached me while I was having dinner with Kevin at a restaurant in the Highlands neighborhood. She looked genuinely distressed, wearing minimal makeup and clothes that suggested she wasn't taking care of herself properly. Her appearance was probably calculated to elicit sympathy, but her emotional state seemed genuine enough that I felt uncomfortable dismissing her entirely. "Ryan, please. Just give me 5 minutes," she said, standing beside our table with tears in her eyes. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I need you to understand what really happened." Kevin started to intervene, clearly frustrated by Amanda's manipulation tactics, but I indicated that he should let her speak. I was curious about what explanation she would offer, and I thought hearing her out might help me process my own feelings about the situation more completely. Amanda's explanation was a masterpiece of self-serving narrative construction. According to her version of events, Tyler had been pursuing her aggressively for months, telling her that I didn't really love her and that our relationship was holding her back from achieving her full potential. He'd convinced her that marriage would trap her in a life that was smaller than what she deserved, that she was settling for security rather than pursuing true happiness. "He made me doubt everything," Amanda said, her voice shaking with apparent emotion. "He told me that you only wanted to marry me because of my family's connections, that you saw me as a stepping stone for your career rather than someone you truly loved. I started questioning whether our relationship was real or whether you were just using me for social advancement." The irony of this explanation was breathtaking. Amanda was accusing me of the exact behavior that her parents had explicitly encouraged, the transactional approach to relationships that they'd suggested I should embrace when they urged me to forgive her betrayal for practical reasons. She was projecting onto me the motivations that seemed to drive her own family's understanding of marriage and partnership. Amanda continued her explanation by positioning herself as a victim of Tyler's manipulation, rather than someone who had made deliberate choices about our relationship. She claimed that Tyler had convinced her to leave on our wedding day by telling her it was her last chance to escape from a marriage that would ruin her life. She'd panicked, made an impulsive decision, and immediately regretted it once she realized that Tyler's promises were empty. "I knew it was a mistake the moment we got to Las Vegas," Amanda said, reaching across the table as if to touch my hand before apparently thinking better of it. "Tyler just wanted the excitement of stealing me away from you. He didn't actually want to build a life with me. When I started talking about finding jobs and getting an apartment together, he made it clear that he saw our whole thing as a temporary adventure. I realized that I'd thrown away the best relationship I'd ever had for someone who didn't even take me seriously." The narrative Amanda was constructing required me to believe that she was fundamentally a good person who had been temporarily misled by a manipulative man, rather than someone who had demonstrated poor judgment, weak character, and a willingness to betray people who loved her. It required me to overlook months of gaslighting, boundary violations, and emotional manipulation that had preceded her departure with Tyler. It required me to accept that her decision to abandon our wedding via text message was an understandable response to external pressure rather than a reveal of her true character. Kevin was clearly struggling to contain his anger during Amanda's performance, and when she finished speaking, he didn't hesitate to respond directly. "Amanda, that's complete bullshit, and you know it. Ryan spent months telling you he was uncomfortable with Tyler's behavior, and you told him he was being jealous and controlling. You made him feel crazy for noticing things that were obviously happening. You don't get to blame Tyler for your own decisions." Amanda's response to Kevin's confrontation was telling. Instead of addressing his specific points about her behavior during our relationship, she became defensive and accusatory. She suggested that Kevin had never liked her and had probably encouraged me to break up with her. She implied that his friendship with me was possessive and unhealthy, that he was trying to sabotage my chances at happiness because he didn't want me to be in a serious relationship. "Kevin, you've never wanted Ryan to be happy with anyone," Amanda said, her voice taking on a sharp edge that reminded me of arguments we'd had during our relationship. "You've been trying to break us up for years because you can't stand the idea of sharing him with someone else. This is exactly what you wanted to happen." Her willingness to attack Kevin revealed the same pattern of behavior that had characterized our relationship conflicts. When confronted with legitimate criticism, Amanda would deflect blame, attack the person raising concerns, and try to isolate me from people who might provide perspective on her behavior. She couldn't engage with the substance of Kevin's points because doing so would require acknowledging responsibility for her own actions. I ended the conversation by telling Amanda that I appreciated her explanation, but that it didn't change my decision about our relationship. Her betrayal had revealed fundamental incompatibilities in our values and communication styles that couldn't be resolved through forgiveness alone. I wished her well, but made it clear that I wasn't interested in pursuing reconciliation. Amanda's reaction to my rejection was swift and vindictive. Within days, I began hearing from mutual friends that she was spreading her own version of our relationship's end, a narrative that portrayed me as inflexible and unforgiving. According to Amanda's story, she'd made one mistake under extreme pressure, had immediately recognized her error, and had done everything possible to make amends. My refusal to consider reconciliation was evidence of my lack of compassion and my inability to handle conflict in a mature way. The social manipulation campaign expanded to include subtle sabotage of my professional relationships. Amanda worked in marketing for a company that did business with several of my company's clients, and she began using those connections to spread doubt about my reliability and judgment. She suggested that someone who couldn't maintain a stable personal relationship might not be trustworthy in business contexts, that my behavior during our breakup revealed character flaws that could affect my professional performance. The professional sabotage was subtle, but persistent. Invitations to industry networking events became less frequent. Business contacts who had previously been friendly became more formal and distant in their interactions. Potential client relationships that had seemed promising suddenly cooled without clear explanation. It took me several weeks to connect these professional difficulties to Amanda's ongoing campaign against me, and by then, the damage to my reputation was becoming significant. Claire had been watching these developments with growing anger and concern. She'd maintained her friendship with Amanda initially, hoping to provide perspective and encourage more honest self-reflection about the wedding situation. But as Amanda's manipulation campaign intensified, Claire became increasingly uncomfortable with her friend's behavior and motivations. "She's not the person I thought I knew," Claire told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. We'd been spending more time together since the wedding crisis, partly because she was helping me navigate the social fallout, and partly because I genuinely enjoyed her company. The Amanda I've been friends with for 6 years was capable of selfishness and poor judgment, but this level of manipulation and vindictiveness is something new. Or maybe it was always there, and I just didn't want to see it. Claire's perspective on Amanda's behavior was particularly valuable because she'd observed our relationship dynamics from the inside over several years. She'd seen how Amanda treated me during conflicts, how she responded to criticism, how she handled situations where her desires conflicted with other people's needs. Claire's growing recognition that Amanda's post-wedding behavior was consistent with patterns she'd observed during our relationship helped validate my own decision to end things permanently. The pressure campaign reached its peak when Amanda enlisted the help of Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the couples counselor we'd seen before our wedding. Dr. Walsh called me to suggest that Amanda had been processing significant insights about her behavior and might benefit from a few sessions focused on accountability and communication. She implied that Amanda was genuinely committed to understanding what had gone wrong and making appropriate changes to her approach to relationships. "Ryan, I can't share the details of my sessions with Amanda, but I can tell you that she's doing serious work to understand her role and what happened between you two," Dr. Walsh said during a phone call that felt like a professional endorsement of Amanda's reconciliation efforts. "She's not asking for immediate forgiveness or reconciliation. She's asking for an opportunity to demonstrate that she's learned from this experience and changed her approach to conflict and communication." The therapist's intervention felt like the most sophisticated element of Amanda's manipulation campaign, because it came from someone whose professional judgment I respected. Dr. Walsh had helped us identify legitimate communication problems during our premarital counseling, and her suggestion that Amanda was making genuine progress toward addressing those problems carried weight that Amanda's own claims couldn't match. But I'd learned enough about manipulation tactics over the past few weeks to recognize that even therapeutic intervention could be weaponized in service of emotional coercion. Amanda's willingness to involve our former couples counselor in her reconciliation efforts suggested calculation rather than genuine remorse. Someone who was truly committed to personal growth would focus on internal work rather than external validation of their progress. The final straw came when Amanda approached my parents directly, bypassing me entirely to make her case for reconciliation. She appeared at their house on a Saturday afternoon, bearing flowers for my mother and a bottle of wine for my father, prepared to spend hours discussing her regrets and her hopes for rebuilding our relationship. According to my parents, she'd been emotional and persuasive, acknowledging her mistakes while emphasizing her love for our family and her commitment to making things right. "Son," she sat in our kitchen for 3 hours, crying and apologizing and talking about how much she loves you, Mom reported during a phone call that evening. "She knows she made a terrible mistake, but she's willing to do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness. She even offered to sign a prenuptial agreement if you're worried about protecting yourself financially. She just wants a chance to prove that she's learned from this experience." The fact that Amanda was willing to involve my parents in her manipulation campaign, to put them in the position of having to choose between supporting me and maintaining their affection for her, revealed the extent to which she was willing to weaponize relationships in service of her goals. She understood that my parents' support was important to me, and she was deliberately trying to create pressure from that direction to supplement the social and professional pressure she was applying elsewhere. I realized that I needed to take more decisive action to protect myself from Amanda's ongoing manipulation. I blocked her number entirely, asked mutual friends to stop providing updates about her emotional state, and made it clear to both sets of parents that I wasn't interested in hearing reconciliation arguments from anyone. I also began documenting the professional sabotage I was experiencing, gathering evidence that could be useful if Amanda's interference with my career became more direct and actionable. Most importantly, I started spending more time with people who supported my decision to prioritize my own well-being over social expectations about forgiveness and reconciliation. Claire became increasingly important during this period, not just as someone who understood the situation, but as someone who reminded me of what healthy relationship dynamics looked like. Her consistent support, honest communication, and respect for my boundaries stood in stark contrast to the manipulation and pressure I was experiencing from others. The contrast between Claire's approach and Amanda's approach to relationships became impossible to ignore. Where Amanda used emotional manipulation and social pressure to try to control outcomes, Claire offered support without strings attached. Where Amanda attacked people who disagreed with her, Claire encouraged honest communication and respected different perspectives. Where Amanda demanded forgiveness as a requirement for ending conflict, Claire accepted my decisions about what was best for my own well-being. As the pressure campaign continued around us, I found myself imagining what it would be like to be in a relationship with someone like Claire. Someone whose instincts about conflict and communication aligned with my own values. The thought was both appealing and terrifying, representing a possibility for genuine partnership that I hadn't experienced during my years with Amanda, but it also felt premature and potentially destructive to a friendship that had become crucial to my emotional stability during one of the most difficult periods of my life. 3 weeks after Amanda's return to Denver, the situation escalated in ways I never could have anticipated. What had started as personal manipulation expanded into a coordinated attack on my professional reputation that threatened to destroy everything I'd worked to build at Innovate Tech Solutions. The turning point came during what should have been a routine client presentation, when I discovered just how far Amanda was willing to go to force me back into a relationship with her. I was presenting our upgraded customer relationship management platform to a potential client, Davidson Marketing Group, a mid-sized agency that could have been a significant addition to our customer base. The presentation had been going well, with their technical team asking detailed questions about integration capabilities and security features. I felt confident about our chances of landing the contract, especially since our platform offered superior functionality at a competitive price point compared to their current system. Halfway through the demonstration, Amanda walked into the conference room. She wasn't supposed to be there. Davidson Marketing wasn't her company, and she had no legitimate business reason to interrupt a sales presentation. But there she was, dressed professionally and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in the room. She greeted the Davidson team members by name, suggesting that she'd cultivated relationships with them specifically for this moment. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Amanda said, her voice carrying just the right note of professional courtesy mixed with personal concern. "I'm Amanda Brooks from Creative Solutions Agency. I've been working with Davidson on some collaborative projects, and I thought I should mention something that might be relevant to your vendor selection process." The Davidson team leader, Sarah Mitchell, looked surprised, but not unwelcoming. "Of course, Amanda. What's on your mind?" Amanda's next words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to sound like professional concern while destroying my credibility. "I want to be completely transparent with you about some personal history that might affect this business relationship. Ryan and I were engaged until recently, and our breakup has been quite contentious. I'm concerned that the emotional stress he's been under might affect his ability to provide reliable service to your organization." The room fell silent as everyone processed this unexpected revelation. Amanda had just weaponized our personal relationship in a professional context, using information about my private life to sabotage a business opportunity. But she wasn't finished. "I don't want to get into details about our personal situation, but I think you should know that Ryan has been struggling with some stability issues lately. His behavior during our breakup has been concerning to mutual friends and family members. I just want to make sure you have all the information you need to make an informed decision about this partnership." Kevin, who had been co-presenting with me, looked stunned by the ambush. The Davidson team members were clearly uncomfortable with being put in the middle of a personal conflict, but Amanda's implications about my professional reliability had definitely affected their perception of the presentation. I could see doubt creeping into their expressions, the kind of wariness that comes when someone raises questions about a vendor's stability and trustworthiness. My first instinct was to defend myself, to explain Amanda's motivations and set the record straight about our relationship. But I realized that engaging with her accusations in front of a potential client would only confirm their worst fears about unprofessional drama affecting business relationships. Instead, I took a deep breath and addressed the situation as calmly as possible. "I apologize for this interruption," I said, looking directly at Sarah Mitchell. Ms. Brooks is correct that we have a personal history, but I can assure you that any personal matters will have no bearing on our professional relationship with Davidson Marketing. If you'd like to reschedule this presentation to focus solely on our technical capabilities, I completely understand. Amanda's face showed a flicker of frustration that I hadn't taken the bait and engaged in a public argument with her. She'd clearly expected me to become defensive or angry, responses that would have validated her concerns about my emotional stability. My calm response undermined her narrative, but the damage to the client relationship was already done. Sarah Mitchell diplomatically suggested that Davidson would need some time to evaluate all their options, which was corporate speak for, "We're not interested anymore." The presentation ended awkwardly, with Amanda lingering to chat with the Davidson team about their collaborative projects, while Kevin and I packed up our materials in stunned silence. On the drive back to our office, Kevin was furious. "That was the most unprofessional thing I've ever witnessed," he said, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "She deliberately sabotaged a business presentation because you won't get back together with her. That's not just manipulative. It's potentially illegal interference with business relationships." I was still processing what had happened, trying to understand how Amanda had known about the Davidson presentation in the first place. Our sales meetings weren't public information, and I hadn't mentioned the specific client to anyone outside our company. Amanda's presence at the meeting suggested she'd been monitoring my professional activities more closely than I'd realized, possibly through mutual contacts in Denver's interconnected business community. Kevin suggested that we document the incident and consider legal action against Amanda for intentional interference with business relationships. He pointed out that her behavior went beyond personal manipulation into the realm of corporate sabotage, especially if she was using her professional connections to systematically undermine my career prospects. When we returned to the office, I scheduled a meeting with our company's CEO, Michael Chen, to brief him on what had happened during the Davidson presentation. Michael was a pragmatic leader who understood that personal dramas could affect business relationships, but he was also protective of his employees and concerned about external threats to company operations. "Ryan, this is serious," Michael said, after I explained the situation. "If Amanda is willing to sabotage client presentations, she might also be spreading rumors about our company's stability or your reliability within the industry. We need to get ahead of this before it affects other business relationships." Michael's concern was justified. Over the following days, we began hearing feedback from other potential clients and industry contacts that suggested Amanda's influence was broader than just the Davidson incident. Questions were being raised about our company's internal stability, about my emotional state, about whether Innovate Tech was a reliable long-term partner for important business relationships. The professional sabotage was sophisticated and difficult to counter directly. Amanda wasn't making false claims about our technical capabilities or our company's financial health. Instead, she was raising subtle questions about personality and reliability, concerns that were impossible to disprove and difficult to address without seeming defensive or unprofessional. Claire was the one who helped me understand the full scope of Amanda's campaign. She'd been hearing rumors within Amanda's social circle about my supposed emotional instability and unprofessional behavior during our breakup. According to these rumors, I'd been stalking Amanda, threatening her, and generally acting in ways that raised concerns about my character and judgment. "She's telling people that you've been showing up at her apartment uninvited, that you've been calling her constantly even though she's asked you to stop, that you made threats about ruining her career if she didn't get back together with you," Claire reported during one of our coffee meetings. "None of it's true, obviously, but she's creating a narrative where you're the unstable, vindictive ex-partner, and she's the victim trying to move on with her life." The sophistication of Amanda's lies was breathtaking. She'd created a version of events that inverted our actual dynamic, positioning herself as the reasonable party being harassed by an obsessive former partner. The lies were designed to be difficult to disprove because they involved private interactions that supposedly happened without witnesses. Claire had initially tried to correct these false narratives when she heard them, but she'd discovered that many people were more interested in dramatic gossip than in accurate information. Amanda's version of events was more exciting than the truth, and some mutual friends seemed almost disappointed when Claire provided factual corrections that made the situation less scandalous. "The worst part is that some people want to believe her version because it makes them feel like they have inside information about a dramatic situation," Claire said. her voice tight with frustration. "They're not really concerned about what actually happened or who got hurt. They just want to be part of the story." Claire's loyalty during this period meant everything to me. She was risking her own social relationships by contradicting Amanda's narrative, and she was probably being pressured by mutual friends to stay neutral or support Amanda. But Claire consistently chose honesty over social convenience, even when it came at personal cost to her own friendships and social standing. The contrast between Claire's integrity and Amanda's manipulation became more apparent every day. Where Amanda was willing to lie and scheme to get what she wanted, Claire was committed to truth even when it was inconvenient. Where Amanda tried to isolate me from supportive relationships, Claire encouraged me to maintain connections with people who treated me well. Where Amanda demanded loyalty as a condition of friendship, Claire offered support without expecting anything in return. I found myself spending more time with Claire, partly because she was one of the few people who understood the full complexity of the situation, and partly because I genuinely enjoyed her company. Our friendship had deepened during the crisis, in ways that felt natural and comfortable, without the drama and emotional manipulation that had characterized my relationship with Amanda. Claire was easy to be around in ways that I was only beginning to appreciate. Conversations with her felt relaxed and genuine, without the underlying tension that had become normal during my years with Amanda. Claire listened without trying to fix everything, offered perspectives without being judgmental, and seemed to enjoy my company without needing me to be anyone other than myself. The growing closeness between Claire and me didn't go unnoticed by Amanda, who began incorporating it into her manipulation campaign. According to rumors that filtered back through mutual friends, Amanda was suggesting that my relationship with Claire was evidence of my untrustworthiness and dishonesty. She claimed that I'd been emotionally involved with Claire during our engagement, that my friendship with her was inappropriate and disrespectful to our relationship. "Amanda is telling people that you and Claire have been having an affair for months, that she caught you together, and that's why she left," reported Jessica Martinez during a phone call that felt more like an interrogation than a friendly check-in. "She says that explains why you're not interested in reconciliation, because you were never really committed to your relationship with her in the first place." The irony of Amanda accusing me of infidelity, while she was the one who had abandoned our wedding for another man, was staggering. But the accusation was strategic rather than logical, designed to provide a narrative explanation for my refusal to pursue reconciliation, while simultaneously damaging my reputation and my friendship with Claire. Amanda's willingness to attack Claire was particularly revealing because it showed the extent to which she was willing to hurt innocent people to achieve her goals. Claire had been nothing but supportive of Amanda during our relationship, had invested countless hours in planning our wedding, and had maintained loyalty to both of us even after Amanda's betrayal. Targeting Claire for destruction simply because she refused to pressure me into reconciliation showed a level of vindictiveness that was genuinely shocking. I realized that I needed to take more decisive action to protect both myself and Claire from Amanda's ongoing attacks. The professional sabotage was threatening my career. The social manipulation was destroying relationships with mutual friends. And now Claire was being targeted for loyalty and honesty. The situation was escalating beyond personal drama into something that could have lasting consequences for multiple people's lives and careers. Kevin suggested that we hire a private investigator to document Amanda's activities and gather evidence of her interference with business relationships. He pointed out that we had grounds for legal action if we could prove systematic harassment and professional sabotage, and that sometimes the threat of legal consequences was enough to discourage continued harassment. But before we could move forward with formal legal action, Amanda made a strategic error that provided me with the opportunity I needed to end her campaign permanently. She decided to escalate her attacks by involving my employer directly, reaching out to Michael Chen to express concerns about my emotional stability and professional judgment. Amanda called Innovate Tech's main office and requested a meeting with Michael, claiming to have important information about one of his employees that could affect the company's reputation and business relationships. She positioned herself as a concerned industry professional rather than a vindictive ex-partner, suggesting that she had reluctantly concluded that my behavior was becoming a liability for both my employer and the broader business community. Michael agreed to the meeting, partly out of concern for his company and partly out of curiosity about what Amanda would actually say. He'd worked with me for several years and had observed my professional behavior directly, so he was skeptical of claims about instability or poor judgment. But he also understood that perception matters in business relationships, and he wanted to understand the full scope of the situation before deciding how to respond. Amanda's meeting with Michael was her tactical masterpiece and her ultimate downfall. She came prepared with what she presented as evidence of my unprofessional behavior, including screenshots of text messages and emails that she claimed demonstrated harassment and threats. She provided detailed accounts of incidents where I had supposedly acted inappropriately, crossing professional boundaries and making colleagues uncomfortable. But Amanda had overreached in her eagerness to build a compelling case against me. Some of the evidence she provided was fabricated, and some of her claims about my behavior were contradicted by objective facts that Michael could easily verify. Most importantly, her willingness to involve my employer crossed a line that demonstrated malicious intent rather than legitimate concern. Michael's first question after reviewing Amanda's materials was about their source and authenticity. When he asked for details about how Amanda had obtained some of the communications she was sharing, her explanations became vague and inconsistent. She couldn't explain how she'd gotten access to emails that should have been private, and some of the text message screenshots contained inconsistencies that suggested digital manipulation. More damning than the fabricated evidence was Amanda's demeanor during the meeting. Michael later described her as calculating and vindictive rather than genuinely concerned about professional misconduct. Her eagerness to damage my reputation, combined with her obvious personal motivations, undermined her credibility and exposed her true agenda. Michael ended the meeting by thanking Amanda for her concerns and indicating that he would investigate the issues she'd raised. But instead of investigating me, he began documenting Amanda's behavior and building a case for restraining order proceedings. He also reached out to several clients and industry contacts to gauge whether they'd been approached by Amanda with similar concerns. The response from Michael's inquiries confirmed that Amanda had been conducting a systematic campaign against my professional reputation. Multiple contacts reported being approached by Amanda with concerns about my stability and reliability, conversations that had definitely affected their willingness to do business with our company. The pattern of behavior was clear and well documented, providing strong evidence of intentional interference with business relationships. Armed with this evidence, Michael called me into his office for a conversation that I expected to be about my employment status, but turned out to be about company support for legal action against Amanda. He'd consulted with the company's legal counsel and determined that Amanda's behavior constituted harassment and intentional interference with business relationships, both of which had legal remedies. "Ryan, I want you to know that this company stands behind you completely," Michael said, handing me a folder containing documentation of Amanda's campaign. "What she's doing isn't just personal harassment, it's corporate sabotage. We're prepared to support legal action to protect both you and our business relationships." The documentation was extensive and damning. Amanda had contacted at least 8 different companies and industry professionals with variations of her concerns about my emotional stability and professional reliability. She'd timed these contacts to coincide with our sales efforts, maximizing the damage to business relationships. She'd also made specific false claims about my behavior that could be proven inaccurate through objective evidence. Most significantly, Amanda had made the tactical error of putting some of her false claims in writing. Email communications with several business contacts contained demonstrably false statements about my behavior and our company's operations. These written falsehoods provided clear evidence of defamation and intentional interference with business relationships. Kevin was ecstatic when I shared the evidence with him. "This is everything we need to shut down her harassment campaign permanently," he said, reviewing the documentation. "She's not just manipulating personal relationships anymore. She's committed actionable interference with business operations. Any decent attorney can get a restraining order based on this evidence, and possibly pursue damages for the business relationships she's destroyed." But before I could move forward with formal legal action, I wanted to give Amanda one opportunity to end her campaign voluntarily. I drafted a cease and desist letter with assistance from Innovate Tech's legal counsel, demanding that she stop all contact with my employer, clients, and business associates. The letter detailed the evidence of her harassment campaign and warned of legal consequences if her behavior continued. Claire helped me deliver the letter, partly because she wanted to witness Amanda's response, and partly because she hoped her presence might encourage more honest communication. We met Amanda at a coffee shop in Cherry Creek, choosing a public location that would discourage dramatic outbursts while providing witnesses to whatever conversation occurred. Amanda's reaction to the cease and desist letter was everything I'd expected and more. She began with denial, claiming that her contacts with business associates had been innocent networking conversations rather than deliberate sabotage. She suggested that any negative impact on my career was the result of legitimate concerns about my character rather than false information she'd provided. When denial didn't work, Amanda shifted to emotional manipulation, crying and apologizing, while insisting that her behavior had been motivated by love rather than vindictiveness. She claimed that she'd been trying to protect people from what she saw as my emotional instability, that her concerns about my professional judgment were genuine rather than fabricated. Finally, when neither denial nor manipulation succeeded in getting the response she wanted, Amanda became openly hostile. She accused me of using legal threats to avoid taking responsibility for my own behavior, suggested that my employer's support was evidence of my manipulation rather than her misconduct, and threatened to escalate her campaign rather than end it. "You think you can intimidate me with lawyers and legal papers?" Amanda said, her voice rising despite the public setting. "I know things about you that could destroy your reputation permanently. If you want to make this a legal battle, I'm prepared to fight back with everything I have." Claire watched this performance with visible disgust, seeing clearly how Amanda's mask had finally slipped to reveal the vindictive person underneath. The woman who had been our friend for years, who had participated in countless social gatherings and celebrations, was revealing herself to be someone capable of sustained cruelty and calculated destruction. "Amanda, listen to yourself," Claire said, her voice quiet but firm. "You're threatening to destroy someone's life because he won't marry you after you abandoned him for another man. Do you understand how insane that sounds? Do you understand what you've become?" Amanda's response to Claire was swift and vicious. She accused Claire of being a manipulative friend who had encouraged the breakdown of our relationship, suggested that Claire's support for me was motivated by romantic interest rather than genuine concern, and threatened to reveal secrets about Claire's personal life that could damage her own career and relationships. The threats against Claire were the final straw for me. I could tolerate Amanda's attacks on my reputation and career, but I wouldn't allow her to destroy someone else's life simply because they'd shown me loyalty and friendship during a difficult time. I stood up from the table and informed Amanda that we would be proceeding with formal legal action immediately. "This conversation is over," I said, gathering the legal documents and preparing to leave. "You've just threatened both of us in public, and your threats have been witnessed and will be documented. Any further contact with me, my employer, my friends, or my business associates will result in immediate legal action." Amanda's final words as we left the coffee shop were a promise that the real battle was just beginning, that she had resources and connections I couldn't imagine, and that she would make sure I regretted choosing legal action over reconciliation. Her threats were delivered with a venom that made several other customers look over in concern, providing additional witnesses to her vindictive behavior. The drive back to my apartment was quiet, with both Claire and me processing the extent of Amanda's transformation from manipulative ex-partner to genuine threat. Claire seemed shaken by Amanda's threats against her, but also relieved that the mask had finally come off completely. There was no longer any ambiguity about Amanda's character or motivations. "I've never seen her like that before," Claire said as we sat in my apartment, reviewing what had just happened. "I mean, I knew she could be selfish and manipulative, but this level of vindictiveness is something else entirely. It's like she's become a completely different person." I suspected that Amanda hadn't become a different person so much as revealed who she'd always been underneath the social polish and relationship performance. The stress of losing control over the situation had stripped away her ability to maintain the facade of reasonableness and victimhood, exposing the calculating and destructive personality that had probably always driven her behavior. The revelation was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it confirmed that my decision to end our relationship had been absolutely correct, that I'd escaped from someone capable of sustained cruelty and manipulation. Terrifying because it demonstrated that Amanda was willing to go much further than I'd imagined to punish people who opposed her will. But the revelation also clarified something important about my feelings for Claire. Watching her stand up to Amanda's threats, seeing her loyalty and courage in the face of potential retaliation, I realized that my growing attraction to her wasn't just about escaping from a toxic relationship. Claire represented everything I'd been missing during my years with Amanda: genuine partnership, emotional honesty, and the kind of integrity that doesn't waver under pressure. As we planned our next steps for dealing with Amanda's threats, I found myself imagining a future with Claire that felt both exciting and peaceful. The contrast with my relationship with Amanda couldn't have been more stark. Where Amanda had brought drama and uncertainty into my life, Claire brought stability and joy. Where Amanda had made me question my own perceptions and instincts, Claire helped me trust myself and see situations clearly. The legal battle with Amanda was just beginning, but for the first time since the wedding disaster, I felt genuinely optimistic about my future. I'd finally seen Amanda's true character without any remaining illusions. I had strong evidence to protect myself from her ongoing harassment, and I was beginning to understand that the best possible outcome of this entire crisis might be the opportunity to build something real with someone who actually deserved my love and trust. The legal proceedings against Amanda moved forward with surprising speed, helped by the extensive documentation of her harassment campaign and the support of Innovate Tech's legal team. Within 2 weeks of filing the restraining order request, we had a court date scheduled and a preliminary injunction preventing Amanda from contacting me, my employer, or any of our business associates. The judge who reviewed the initial evidence described Amanda's behavior as a textbook case of harassment and professional sabotage. But even with legal protection in place, I knew that Amanda wouldn't simply accept defeat and move on with her life. She'd invested too much in her campaign against me to walk away quietly, and her threats during our final confrontation suggested that she was prepared to escalate further rather than acknowledge the consequences of her behavior. I was right to be concerned, though the form her retaliation took surprised even me. Amanda's response to the restraining order was to hire an expensive attorney and file counterclaims alleging that I had been harassing her, that the legal action was an attempt to silence a victim of domestic abuse, and that my employer's support for my case represented corporate intimidation of a whistleblower. Her counter-narrative was sophisticated and designed to appeal to contemporary social justice sensibilities, positioning herself as a brave woman standing up to powerful men who were trying to destroy her career for speaking truth to power. The domestic abuse allegations were particularly strategic because they were difficult to disprove and automatically triggered certain legal protections and public sympathy. According to Amanda's court filings, I had been emotionally abusive throughout our relationship, controlling her social interactions and isolating her from friends and family. She claimed that her departure on our wedding day had been an escape from an abusive situation rather than a betrayal of our relationship. Amanda's attorney, Harrison Mitchell, was a skilled practitioner who specialized in high-stakes family law cases. He understood how to craft narratives that would resonate with judges and juries, and he was particularly effective at presenting Amanda as a sympathetic figure who had been victimized by powerful men. Mitchell's strategy was to put my character on trial rather than defending Amanda's documented harassment campaign. The counter-allegations forced Innovate Tech's legal team to expand their case preparation significantly. They needed to gather evidence not just of Amanda's harassment, but also of the actual dynamics of our relationship. Character witnesses who could testify about my behavior and documentation that would disprove Amanda's claims about abuse and control. The process was invasive and emotionally exhausting, requiring me to revisit painful aspects of our relationship in forensic detail. Claire became crucial during this period, not just as emotional support, but as a key witness who could testify about the actual dynamics of my relationship with Amanda. She'd observed our interactions over several years, had been present during conflicts and reconciliations, and could provide first-hand testimony about whether Amanda's allegations of abuse and control had any basis in reality. Preparing Claire's testimony required us to spend hours reviewing the history of my relationship with Amanda, discussing specific incidents and patterns of behavior that would be relevant to the legal proceedings. These conversations were difficult for both of us, partly because they involved painful memories, and partly because they required Claire to potentially testify against someone who had been her best friend for years. I keep thinking about all the times Amanda complained about you being too accommodating, too willing to compromise, too focused on avoiding conflict, Claire said during one of our preparation sessions. She used to say she wished you would stand up to her more, that you were too passive in the relationship. It's surreal that she's now claiming you were controlling and abusive. Claire's perspective on our relationship dynamics was particularly valuable because she'd often served as a confidant for both Amanda and me during conflicts. She'd heard Amanda's private complaints about my supposedly insufficient ambition, my reluctance to embrace her family's social expectations, my tendency to prioritize work over networking opportunities. These complaints were inconsistent with allegations of control and abuse, and Claire's testimony could provide crucial context for the court. But preparing for the legal battle also deepened my relationship with Claire in ways that went beyond the practical necessities of the case. Spending so much time together, discussing intimate details of relationships and character, sharing the stress of potential public scrutiny, we developed a level of emotional intimacy that felt both natural and unprecedented in my experience. Claire was unlike anyone I'd ever been close to. Where Amanda had been demanding and unpredictable, Claire was steady and thoughtful. Where Amanda had made me feel like I needed to perform or achieve to earn her affection, Claire seemed to appreciate me exactly as I was. Where Amanda had complicated every interaction with underlying agendas and emotional manipulation, Claire was direct and honest in ways that made communication feel effortless. The romantic tension between us had been building for weeks, but neither of us had acknowledged it directly. The timing felt inappropriate given the ongoing legal battle and the fact that Claire was testifying on my behalf. But the connection between us was becoming impossible to ignore, especially as we spent more time together, and I began to understand how different she was from Amanda in fundamental ways. The breakthrough came during a particularly stressful evening when we'd been reviewing testimony preparation until late in the night. Claire was staying at my apartment because she'd been receiving threatening phone calls that we suspected were connected to Amanda's legal strategy. She'd been reluctant to involve law enforcement because the calls came from blocked numbers and never included explicit threats, but they were clearly designed to intimidate her before her testimony. We'd been working at my kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and timeline notes, when Claire suddenly put down her pen and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Ryan, can I ask you something?" she said, her voice quieter than usual. I nodded, expecting another question, about legal strategy or testimony preparation. If none of this had happened, if Amanda hadn't left, if you'd gotten married as planned, do you think you would have been happy? The question caught me off guard because it required me to consider alternative timelines and hypothetical outcomes that I'd been avoiding. But as I thought about it seriously, the answer became clear. "No," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I would have convinced myself that I was happy, but I wouldn't have been. I was already walking on eggshells around Amanda, already questioning my own perceptions, already making myself smaller to accommodate her expectations. Marriage would have made it worse, not better. Claire nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "I watched you during those last few months before the wedding, and you seemed anxious all the time, like you were bracing for the next conflict or criticism. That's not how someone should feel about marrying the person they love." Her observation was accurate and painful. I had been anxious during the months leading up to our wedding, though I'd attributed those feelings to normal pre-marriage stress rather than fundamental problems with our relationship. Amanda's departure had been devastating, in the moment, but it had also freed me from a dynamic that was slowly destroying my confidence and self-trust. "Claire," I said, feeling like I was approaching the edge of something significant. "What we have, this friendship, the way we communicate, the way I feel when I'm with you, it's completely different from anything I experienced with Amanda. It's what I thought a partnership was supposed to feel like." Claire was quiet for a long moment, and I worried that I'd crossed a line or made her uncomfortable. But when she looked at me again, her expression was soft and honest in a way that made my heart race. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said. "I've been thinking that for months, actually, even before the wedding. But I couldn't say anything because you were with Amanda, and she was my best friend, and it would have been wrong to interfere with your relationship." The admission hung in the air between us, loaded with implications and possibilities that neither of us had been willing to acknowledge before. But now that the words had been spoken, the emotional truth they represented felt undeniable. I don't want to complicate things while the legal situation is ongoing, I said, though every instinct was pulling me toward her. And I don't want you to think that my feelings for you are just a reaction to what happened with Amanda. Claire smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made everything else in the world seem manageable. Ryan, my feelings for you aren't a reaction to anything. They're just feelings that I've had for a long time and haven't been able to express. The legal situation will resolve itself eventually, but what's between us is separate from all that drama. The kiss that followed was gentle and tentative at first, then deeper and more confident, as we both realized that this wasn't a mistake or a rebound, but something that had been building naturally over years of friendship and weeks of intense collaboration. Kissing Claire felt like coming home after a long journey, like finally understanding what I'd been searching for without knowing it. We spent the rest of the evening talking about our feelings, about the timeline of our attraction to each other, about what it might mean for our future. Claire admitted that she'd been attracted to me almost from the beginning of our friendship, but had suppressed those feelings out of loyalty to Amanda. I confessed that I'd always felt more comfortable and authentic around her than around Amanda, but had attributed that to friendship rather than romantic compatibility. The conversation was honest and vulnerable in ways that reminded me how much I'd been missing during my relationship with Amanda. Claire and I could discuss complicated emotions without drama, could acknowledge uncertainty without creating conflict, could express affection without demanding guarantees about the future. It was exactly the kind of communication I'd been craving, without realizing it. The legal proceedings continued for several more weeks, but Amanda's case began to unravel as more evidence emerged about her harassment campaign. Several business contacts came forward to testify about Amanda's inappropriate communications regarding my professional reliability. The private investigator that Kevin had suggested we hire produced documentation of Amanda's systematic attempts to damage my reputation across multiple professional networks. Most damaging to Amanda's credibility was the discovery that she'd fabricated some of the evidence in her domestic abuse allegations. Her attorney had presented screenshots of text messages that supposedly showed me making threats and demands, but forensic analysis revealed that the messages had been digitally manipulated. The fabricated evidence not only undermined her abuse allegations but also opened her up to potential perjury charges. Harrison Mitchell withdrew from representing Amanda when the fabricated evidence came to light, apparently unwilling to risk his professional reputation by continuing to present false claims in court. Amanda was forced to find new representation, and her second attorney was less skilled and less committed to her increasingly implausible narrative. The turning point in the legal case came when Claire testified about the actual dynamics of my relationship with Amanda. Claire's testimony was calm, detailed, and devastating to Amanda's credibility. She described specific incidents where Amanda had criticized me for being too accommodating, too willing to compromise, too reluctant to assert control over social situations. She testified about Amanda's complaints that I was insufficiently ambitious and not aggressive enough in pursuing career advancement. Most importantly, Claire testified about Amanda's behavior with Tyler during the months leading up to our wedding. She described Amanda's emotional affair, her dismissive attitude toward my concerns, her gaslighting attempts to make me question my own perceptions about their relationship. Claire's testimony painted a picture of Amanda as someone who was manipulative and unfaithful rather than victimized and abused. Amanda's attorney tried to discredit Claire by suggesting that her testimony was motivated by romantic interest in me rather than commitment to truth. But this line of attack backfired because it required the attorney to acknowledge that Claire and I had developed a genuine romantic relationship, which contradicted Amanda's claims that I was obsessively pursuing reconciliation with her. The judge's final ruling was comprehensive and decisive. The restraining order against Amanda was made permanent, with provisions that prevented her from contacting me, my employer, my friends, or my business associates. Amanda was also ordered to pay damages for the business relationships her harassment had damaged, though the monetary award was less important to me than the legal validation that her behavior had been unacceptable. More significantly, the judge included language in the ruling that addressed Amanda's false allegations about domestic abuse. The court found that Amanda had knowingly presented fabricated evidence and made false claims about my character, behavior that the judge described as an abuse of the legal system and a disservice to genuine victims of domestic violence. Amanda's legal defeat was complete and public, reported in local business publications and legal blogs, as an example of how harassment campaigns can backfire when they escalate to fabricated evidence and false legal claims. Her reputation in Denver's business community was permanently damaged, and several of her professional relationships were severed when the full scope of her behavior became public knowledge. But the most important outcome of the legal victory wasn't the protection it provided, or the vindication it represented. It was the clarity it gave me about moving forward with my life and my relationship with Claire. The legal battle had forced me to examine my past relationship honestly, to understand the patterns of manipulation and control that I'd been subjected to, and to appreciate the contrast with the healthy communication and genuine partnership I was experiencing with Claire. Claire and I waited until the legal proceedings were completely finished before making our relationship public or discussing long-term plans. We wanted to be certain that our feelings for each other were authentic and sustainable rather than products of the intense circumstances that had brought us together. But as weeks passed and our connection deepened, it became clear that we'd found something rare and valuable. 6 months after the restraining order was finalized, Claire and I decided to get married. The decision felt natural and inevitable rather than dramatic or impulsive. We'd spent months getting to know each other as romantic partners, learning how we handled conflict and stress, discovering how our individual goals and values aligned into shared vision for the future. Our wedding was everything that my planned wedding with Amanda hadn't been. It was small and intimate, focused on our commitment to each other rather than social performance or family expectations. We were married in a simple ceremony at a mountain lodge outside Boulder, with only our immediate families and closest friends in attendance. Kevin served as my best man, and Claire's sister Emma was her maid of honor. The ceremony itself reflected our personalities and priorities in ways that felt authentic and meaningful. We wrote our own vows, promising to support each other's individual growth, while building something together that was stronger than what either of us could create alone. We committed to honest communication, even when it was difficult, and to treating each other with respect even during inevitable conflicts and disagreements. The contrast with my relationship with Amanda was striking and liberating. Where Amanda had demanded constant attention and validation, Claire was secure in herself and supportive of my individual interests and friendships. Where Amanda had complicated every decision with emotional manipulation and social pressure, Claire approached problems collaboratively and rationally. Where Amanda had made me feel like I needed to earn love through performance and achievement, Claire made it clear that she loved me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Our honeymoon was a 2-week trip to New Zealand, something we'd planned together based on shared interests in hiking and photography rather than social media, opportunities or family expectations. We spent our time exploring national parks, having long conversations about our future goals, and simply enjoying each other's company without external pressures or distractions. During one particularly memorable evening, sitting beside a lake in Fiordland National Park, Claire and I talked about the journey that had brought us together. We acknowledged how painful the experience with Amanda had been, but we also recognized how it had led us to understand what we really wanted in a partnership. "I'm grateful for everything that happened," Claire said, her hand in mine as we watched the sunset reflect off the water. Not because Amanda's behavior was acceptable, but because it showed us both what we didn't want and helped us recognize what we did want when we found it. I understood what she meant. The crisis with Amanda had forced me to examine my own patterns in relationships, to understand how I'd been accepting treatment that wasn't healthy or sustainable. It had also shown me Claire's character under pressure, her loyalty and honesty, and courage in situations where other people had chosen convenience over integrity. When we returned from our honeymoon, we established our life together in a house we bought in the Highlands neighborhood, close enough to downtown Denver for easy access to work and social activities, but far enough removed to feel peaceful and private. We both continued our careers, but we also began planning for shared goals like starting a family and eventually building our own business together. Innovate Tech Solutions continued to grow, and my role in the company expanded as we landed new clients and developed more sophisticated products. The professional damage that Amanda's harassment campaign had caused was eventually repaired, partly through the legal vindication I'd received, and partly through consistent demonstration of reliable performance and character. Michael Chen promoted me to Vice President of Product Development, a role that came with equity in the company and significant input into strategic direction. Claire's nonprofit work also flourished as she developed programs that combined her graphic design skills with her passion for educational equity. She eventually started her own consulting firm that specialized in helping nonprofit organizations improve their visual communications and marketing effectiveness. Her business grew through referrals and word-of-mouth recommendations, built on the same integrity and competence that had attracted me to her as a person. We heard occasional updates about Amanda through mutual acquaintances, though we made no effort to maintain contact with her directly. According to these second-hand reports, Amanda had eventually left Denver for a position with a marketing firm in Phoenix, apparently finding that her reputation in Colorado's business community had been too damaged to recover from. She'd struggled professionally for some time after the legal proceedings, as word of her harassment campaign had spread through industry networks. The updates about Amanda's circumstances didn't bring me satisfaction or vindictive pleasure. I'd moved so far beyond that relationship and those conflicts that her struggles felt like news about a stranger rather than someone who had once been central to my life. I wished her well in general terms, but I also had no interest in reconnecting or attempting to repair the damage that her choices had caused to multiple relationships and careers. 2 years after our wedding, Claire and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Grace. Holding her in the hospital room, surrounded by our families who had gathered to celebrate her arrival, I felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the journey that had led to this moment. The crisis that had begun with Amanda's betrayal had ultimately opened the door to everything I'd been searching for without knowing it. Grace inherited Claire's expressive eyes and what appeared to be my stubborn determination, a combination that promised an interesting childhood and adolescence. But more importantly, she was born into a family built on the kind of honest communication and mutual respect that would give her a strong foundation for understanding healthy relationships as she grew up. Watching Claire with our daughter, seeing her natural warmth and patience and wisdom, I was reminded daily of how fortunate I was to have found someone whose character matched their surface appeal. The contrast with Amanda wasn't something I thought about often anymore, but when I did, it reinforced my appreciation for the genuine partnership I'd discovered with Claire. Sometimes people asked me whether I regretted the years I'd spent with Amanda, whether I felt like they'd been wasted time that could have been better invested in finding the right person sooner. But I'd come to understand that those years hadn't been wasted because they'd taught me what I needed to know about myself and about relationships to recognize and appreciate what I had with Claire. The morning Amanda had sent that devastating text message, destroying our wedding plans and humiliating me in front of everyone we knew, had felt like the end of everything important in my life, but it turned out to be the beginning of everything I'd been unconsciously hoping to find. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you creates space for the best thing that could happen to you. And sometimes the person you're meant to be with has been right there all along, waiting for you to be ready to see them clearly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.